It was the morning of the 25th of October, 1944. One American 5-inch shell, which cut right through the gray dawn off the coast of Samar Island, was aimed at the Japanese cruiser Chokai. The shell itself was small enough not to do any actual injury, but it set up a chain reaction so tremendous that it broke the warship in two. It is not merely the story of heavy gunfire, but of the hidden technology in these shells which made naval battles history. Following the post-First World War, naval forces in the world started to realize that bigger guns and heavier armor did not necessarily work in naval war. The Battle of Jutland had shown major flaws in the British naval shells, which sometimes in the combat failed miserably in essential aspects. A lot of shells not only broke as they hit the armor of the enemy, but they never exploded at all when they hit their object. Such failures were critical and led to the death of hundreds of people in the battle. Noticing these vital issues, the U.S. Navy started on a massive project to develop their Navy ammunition. They wanted to come up with shells that would be able to penetrate the heavy armor and detonate at the right time inside a boat of the enemy. This necessitated not only an improvement in the design of the shell to make sure that it resisted impact, but also in the explosives that were fitted and the consistency of the fuses to be sure that they would detonate at the appropriate moment. The purpose of these developments was to inflict the greatest harm possible to the internal facilities of the enemy, making naval artillery useful in the years which followed the battle. The dramatic change in the field of artillery was the introduction of the so-called delay fuse, which played a vital part in the development that was designed by the American engineers. These little mechanical contrivances were small brains to artillery shells and were intended to produce a brief, sharp delay upon hitting armor. This time, lag enabled the shell to pass through the outer armor of an armored object before exploding, so the shell could do the maximum damage internally possible. Without this delay in action, the shells, as they by striking, would burst and frequently produce a far less internal injury. It was not a simple mechanism, but complicated. It consisted of small weights and springs and resulted on striking the surface of the target immediately. This caused a miniaturized powder charge that was used as a very precise countdown timer. The genius of these delay fuses was to be found in the design complexity and mechanical accuracy. The shell shock would have caused the internal parts to move in motion, triggering the timed sequence. Although the time of break-in was only in the few fractions of a second, it was sufficient to enable the shell to penetrate the protective armor and then burst in good time within. This invention made the artillery very efficient in the battlefield because the explosive force of the weapon was no longer lost out of battle as it used to be. This was a significant technological advance that created a significant difference in the performance of artillery shells, which led to the increased deadliness and effectiveness of ordnance in war. These fuses were not just timers and were cleverly designed systems that were a blend of physics and mechanical engineering. Their advancement was characteristic of the innovations of war, in which even a fraction of a second might spell the difference between hitting the enemy armor or a wasted chance in the battle. Delay fuse is another prime example of how engineering ingenuity had a direct effect on battlefield effectiveness by means of accurate and unfailing timing. It was not only the refinement of the gun fuse that was practiced by the American naval policy during the World War II. There was also the endeavor to render the shells themselves substantially heavier, much heavier than before. Instead of building guns of a greater caliber to fight battleships, the U.S. Navy focused on manufacturing so-called super-heavy shells that could be launched by the guns already on the ships. The heavier shells had a lower range than the lighter ones, although they carried much more kinetic energy in the air, which was converted into better armor penetration at even greater distances. This method enabled the shells to be used to smash through heavy armor effectively, keeping their destructive force at a distance. This ammunition innovation saw even older battleships being refurbished without necessarily involving expensive and time-intensive ship reconfigurations and installation of new guns. The U.S. fleet could be armed with these bigger, heavier shells, and by so arming its existing ships, gain equal firepower with the heavier guns of the Japanese fleet. The Bureau of Ordnance found that a 16-inch super-heavy shell weighing about 2,700 pounds could pierce the deck as easily as a regular 18-inch shell, which was a considerable advance, considering the limitation with respect to the weight of guns calibers required by the naval treaties. Therefore, by these developments, the U.S. Navy could sustain and enhance the power of its battleships and deliver similar or better firepower without necessarily remodeling complete ships or constructing new, larger battleships afresh. The Japanese cruisers and destroyers became known during World War II through their powerful torpedoes, which were known by the official name Type 93 or the Long Lance. These torpedoes were unique in the sense that they used pure oxygen as oxidizer, rather than compressed air, enabling them to travel a very long distance in the sea at high speed with little waking effect. This enabled the Type 93 torpedo to be the most advanced and powerful of its era, as it was able to hit the enemy ships much farther than the enemy ships had anticipated of being hit. Its high 24-inch diameter, powered by a blend of kerosene and pure oxygen, made the torpedo have a lethal range of over 20 kilometers, and it could frequently surprise the enemy ships that were unprepared, and this was one of the main tactical advantages of the Japanese naval forces when they were operating in the night. But the coin has two sides. Such a strong design also had its risks. Torpedoes were actually floating bombs in the decks of their launching vessels, since the fuel that powered them, pure oxygen, was extremely volatile and would result in very catastrophic secondary explosions in case ignited. This was a large weakness which proved tragic in the war, like the Battle of Samar, when only one shell struck the Japanese heavy cruiser Chokai and exploded the torpedoes it was carrying. The resulting blast was disastrous and immediate, and the ship was ripped apart in a violent explosion. The destructive capability, with the risk it brought to its own carriers, of this duality of the design of the Long Lance torpedo was a reminder of the danger of the balance between technological innovation in naval warfare. Its long striking power, great high speed, and strong warheads combined to make the Long Lance feared and respected by the Allied naval forces during the Pacific War. Japanese cruisers and destroyers armed with these torpedoes were able to attack with surprise, even when they were out of the effective reprisal raid by their foes. Meanwhile, the danger of catastrophic loss where the onboard torpedoes went off was a standing danger at all times. The combination of offensive potential and defenseless nature characterized numerous naval battles, highlighting the lethality and the very real threat of the Type 93 torpedo as a weapon of war in World War II. On October 25, 1944, an extraordinary battle took place over Samar that resulted in the creation of a team of underdogs in one of the most incredible naval battles in World War II. The destroyers of American escort and their little tin can sailors had to contend with a very superior fleet of the Japanese. They had much lighter and slower ships than the enemy battleships and cruisers with single 5-inch guns. All these drawbacks notwithstanding, their superior courage and accurate gunshots proved decisive in the results of the battle. The destroyers, especially the USS Johnston, bravely rushed at the enemy fleet through shooting torpedoes and shooting shells at much bigger and stronger Japanese ships. The Japanese fighters thought that they were fighting a big and strong American fleet, when in reality the American group was made up of lightly armed escort carriers and destroyers. This wrong estimate was in part attributed to the tenacity and tactical skill of the tin can sailors. The tiny and quick-firing American shells brought the Japanese vessels maneuvering and dodging to confuse them in their ranks. It is worth noting that the USS Johnston, led by Lieutenant Commander Ernest E. Evans, made bold torpedo attacks and precision gunfire that caused tremendous damage to the Japanese heavy cruisers and was able to hinder the Japanese offensive. The great defensive fighting of the small American ships saved the Japanese fleet from reaching and destroying the much-needed Leyte invasion area. And so, the tide of this important battle was turned. The effectiveness of American artillery shells in World War II was not an accident, but a product of a hard and careful testing procedure. All ammunition was put through rigorous reliability tests, such as a check on each and every fuse, and also a weighing of every ammunition round to the letter to be sure that everything followed the exact spec. There were also new elements of the American artillery like brilliant fusing devices and color-coded paint schemes on the shells that would enable quick protection and use in war scenarios. The development of the technology of fuses was a significant element as well. Specifically, the use of radar-guided fuses significantly increased the effectiveness of American anti-aircraft fire. These new fuses were a significant technological advancement over the mechanical timers which Japanese forces had used. All these elements of strict testing, fine engineering, and technology combined to make sure that American ammunition had a high level of reliability and effectiveness during the battle, which helped them greatly to succeed on the battlefield. This rigorous method of ammunition design and testing heightened strategic superiority of the American military, as it was keen on a steady performance and science so as to acquire an upper hand in war. Focus on accurate quality control and technology development in the sphere of fusing systems was the key to the success of American shells being more trustworthy and lethal than Japanese ones. These innovations not only worked on the ground, but also in the air where the radar-combined shells drastically enhanced the performance of the anti-aircraft defense systems, and it was a critical advancement in the warfare ordnance. These advantages are characteristic of the larger U.S. strategy of military technology, at the time when the care of exactness and scientific discipline was of intense importance in the assurance of success. Technology was also a key factor in naval warfare, but the success of that technology could not be achieved without the strict conditioning that the American mariners had been subjected to. These sailors did not simply learn the working of the equipment, but they were drilled through the whole procedure of loading, choosing, and firing of the proper kinds of shells until it became automatic and instinctive. This was also leveled to the point of functioning perfectly, even in the toughest of conditions, such as total darkness, to enable them to stay precise and efficient to whatever the conditions were. This practice training meant that it could be decided instantly on which shell to take off, be it armor-piercing, be it high-capacity, or practice rounds, and this decision was often the difference between life and death at the front. By the word of command to open fire, the gunners were able to maintain a steady and continuous rate of fire, always throwing shell after shell whenever and wherever it was required, most needed. Their well-synchronized actions and mastered speed turned the technological superiority of their arms into a tactical superiority in battle scenarios that saved lives and secured their vessels through skilled maneuvering during the firing. This expertise was not only regarding the hardware itself, it was regarding the human factor of learning how to use that hardware by discipline, practice, and fast thinking, so that each shot would be life or death and their skill and preparation would be called upon. By late in the Pacific War, even the formerly powerful fleet of Japanese heavy cruisers was virtually wiped out. Virtually all these mighty war vessels had been either sunk in the ocean depths or were so badly maimed as to be unrepaired. These once pride of Japanese naval strength and technological ambition cruisers were the victims of the ugly realities of modern naval warfare. They were not ruined by one fault or a tactical error, but a combination of weaknesses which became so clear in later periods of the war. Stunning post-war surveys by naval analysts found that there was an interesting trend to these casualties. It was found the special number of Japanese cruisers had been destroyed not only by direct hits, but also by disastrous secondary explosions, American shells cut right through essential places and detonated the torpedoes, ammunition stores, or fuel reserves, causing chain reactions that ripped the vessels apart internally in most instances. The destruction of these internal explosions highlighted a fundamental flaw in the philosophy of the magazine protection and ship's design that emphasized on offensive capability and speed over resilience and explosive containment. Finally, the ability to disable these vessels was not dependent on any form of luck or divine favor of the Americans. Rather, it was the result of careful design, accurate design of ordnance, and rigorous training of gunnery crews. Even the shells of relatively small caliber, used with accuracy and where the aim was taken, might produce devastation, which was far more than their size implied. Such a marriage of mechanical creativity and strategic effectiveness made what appeared to be modest arms become tools of decisive effect and proved how skill in design and high accuracy would make victory in the inexorable environment of naval war. The concepts initially tested in these shells went on influencing naval weapons many years after World War II. The lessons, the cautious testing, the engineering trustworthiness, the training of men, all these are not yet dead in modern navies. The next time you read of the giant warships colliding at sea, keep in mind, it is sometimes the weapon you never notice coming at you which is the most important. To hear more of untold history of World War II, and to be notified of others like this story of innovation and daring, subscribe and tell us in the comments what you would like to hear about. Thanks for watching.